Prisoner B-3087 by Gratz. Chapter 7. Jews of Krakow! The announcement blared from the speakers. Get up! Get out! Get moving! 7,000 volunteers are needed for the resettlement camps. The asked-for volunteers had not appeared in Zgadi Square the next morning, and the Germans were not happy. Just after dawn, they drove through the streets of the ghetto, in trucks with big speakers on them, yelling at us to come out. It will be worse for you if you hide, they called. Come out now and all will be forgiven. I didn't believe them. None of us did. Uncle Moshe, Aunt Gisela, and my cousin Zitka were all there with us. They had decided to come hide in our pigeon coop. So had the rest of my aunts and uncles and cousins. There were 12 of us, all crammed inside the little shack on the roof. It was too crowded, but there was no way we could turn them away. Everyone was afraid of this new announcement, and we had all seen too many resettlements take place to take it lightly. At least all of us pressed together in the coop helped keep us warm. We couldn't start a fire, or the smoke would give us away. A gunshot rang out. Crack! A woman screamed. Pop, 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 went a machine gun. I scrambled to the little window in our coop, where we'd hung a blanket to hide us. Yannick, no, my mother whispered. But I had to see. Across the street was a building that had been turned into a hospital, and I watched through a hole in the blanket as the Nazis pushed sick people out of the door and down the steps. Some of them were too weak to walk and collapsed on the pavement. They cried out piteously. What's happening? Moshe asked. My heart was in my throat, but I managed to answer. Sick people. Old people. They're taking them out of the hospital. They can't be taking them to the work camps for resettlement, Moshe said. His voice was quiet but urgent. They would never take the sick and the old away to work. They're taking them to die, and anyone else with them. As I watched, the Nazis walked up behind the sick people from the hospital and started to shoot. Bodies fell on bodies, a great pile of them in the street. They fell with terrible screams. I pulled away from the window, unable to watch anymore. No, I said. They're not taking them away. They're shooting them right here. Not even Uncle Moshe had anything to say to that. My mother reached for my hand and pulled me back to her. We sat like that for hours, listening to the gunshots and the screams in the street. My younger cousins huddled next to their mothers, weeping on and off quietly. I was terrified just like they were, but I wasn't going to cry. I was a man now, I reminded myself. I was a man, and I wanted to do something. Something to stop the Nazis, to save my family. I asked myself over and over again what I could do to help, but I had no answer. Shunk shunk. The big metal door to the roof rattled. Someone was trying to come through. I held my breath listening. Shunk shunk. Shunk shunk. Would the steel bars hold? Would whoever was on the other side start shooting? I watched my mother's eyes grow wide again, watched her chest heave as she breathed faster and faster. She looked like she might scream, which would give us away for sure. My father hugged her close, holding her face to his shoulder. Shunk, 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 shunk. I waited for a gunshot. Waited. But then, for whatever reason, the rattling stopped and whoever it was went away. We held still, none of us daring to breathe, waiting for someone to try to come through again. But an hour passed, and then another, and another, and no one came back. That evening, the trucks drove through the streets again with a new message for us. Jews of Krakow, unless everyone comes to Zgadi Square for selection, this ghetto will be liquidated. If you do not come out of your houses by 6 p.m., every one of you will be shot on sight when we find you. Liquidated? Do you hear that? Uncle Abraham said. Liquidated. Like it's a business decision. They would get rid of us like so many old pairs of shoes. We should go, Moshe said. He stood. You heard them. They will kill us if we don't. They will kill us if we do, I said. They said they will liquidate the ghetto only if we do not come out. By hiding, we seal our death warrant, Moshe said. No, I said. I could feel my pulse racing. We can't trust them. It's a trick. I know it is. It's a trick to get us to come out of our hiding place. You're still a boy, Yannick, even if you've had your bar mitzvah. Listen to me, all of you. If we stay here and are found, we'll be shot, Moshe argued. He opened the door to the coop. We have to go now. If we do what they say, they may let us live. My uncles and cousins started arguing about it. Dawid agreed with Moshe. Abraham wanted to stay. My aunts argued too, and the younger children started to cry. I looked to my parents to see what they wanted, but my mother's face was still buried in my father's shoulder, and he was comforting her. Tears welled up in my eyes. I wasn't a boy. Not anymore. Not after my bar mitzvah. Not after a year in the Krakow ghetto. I knew I had to be a grown-up now. For my parents. For everyone. I pushed past Uncle Moshe and marched to the big metal door. I yanked off the steel bars and flung the door open with a clang. There, I said. Go. If you want to leave so badly, if you want to hand yourselves over to those killers, then do it right now. But I'm not. I've seen what the Nazis think of us, how they treat us. We all have. So they kill us if they find us here. If we go down there on our own, they will most certainly kill us. At least if we hide out here, there is a chance they won't find us. That's a chance I'm willing to take. My outburst shut everyone else up. They all stared at one another without speaking, until my father rose. Yannick speaks with the wisdom of a prophet Isaiah, he said softly, then quoted, Come, my people, and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while until the wrath is past. He cleared his throat and looked around. Mina and I are staying too. One by one the others agreed until even Uncle Moshe sat down and was quiet. I closed the door and slid the steel bars back in place, making sure they were tight. Night fell, and with it came more gunshots, more screams from the streets below. The deportation lasted for 2 days, but on the third day, when the sun rose, there were no more trucks in the streets, no more gunshots, no more Nazis. They did not liquidate the entire ghetto as they had promised. Once their quota was filled, they went away again. 7,000 Jews had been collected and taken away to die, but we were not among them. Chapter 8. After the deportation, the wailing of old women could be heard from nearly every window and door in the ghetto. 7,000 husbands and fathers, wives and mothers, brothers and sisters and children had been taken to their deaths, or so we heard from survivors. Rumors were whispered in the streets that shootings in the woods were too much trouble for the Nazis. Now they were gassing Jews to death in trucks and boiling their bodies to make soap, or so it was said. The thought of that made my stomach turn. There were more deportations, but for a time they were smaller selections, like those that had come before. And my existence in the ghetto, it wasn't a life, just an existence, went back to what it was. Those who could work were not taken away, and so reluctantly my father and I showed up for work details every morning. I was assigned to a tailor shop, and the work was manageable, but it seemed as if my former life, school, friends, time to play and read, belonged to another world entirely. One afternoon after work, I made a fateful decision. I went by a friend's house instead of going directly back to my family's rooftop hideaway. If I had gone straight home, if I had gone out to get our rations with my mother and father, things might have turned out very differently than they did. The streets of the ghetto were empty when I finally headed home that day. The emptiness could only mean one thing. another deportation. When the Nazis came looking for Jews to deport, all the people who lived on the streets found places to hide. They had to, or they'd be taken. Men and women with homes to go to put their heads down and hurried there by whatever back alleys and side streets they could. I skirted down Lemowski Street, ready to duck behind a busted-up piece of furniture or hide in a pile of old rags if I heard the Nazis coming. I was almost home when I heard the bark of German officers around the corner and the shuffling of shoes on pavement. I scanned the area for any place I could hide, but there wasn't one. I squeezed myself into a corner on the other side of a short set of stairs to an apartment building and tried to disappear into the shadows. The Nazi officers marched by in the street in front of me. All they had to do was turn their heads to see me, but they kept their eyes forward, followed by a ragtag group of Jews who were being deported. I watched them go by, a few hundred or so, their heads bent low and every one of them silent as the grave. Wait, there, in the middle of the crowd, I froze. Was that my mother and father? I stood on my toes trying to see into the mass of people, but the angle had changed. I was standing in plain sight now, my head and shoulders well over the top of the short flight of stairs, but I didn't care. Were my parents in that deportation? Maybe I'd just seen a couple who resembled them. I wanted to scream. I almost ran to the column of marching Jews to call my parents' names, to find out if that was really them. But the sight of the German SS officers bringing up the rear stopped me. If my parents weren't being marched by right now, I'd be caught and never see them again. But if it was them... As soon as the prisoners and their guards were past, I dashed from behind the stairs and ran all the way home. I burst through the door to our apartment building and raced up the stairs and pounded on the big metal door to our rooftop hideaway. The bars were still over the door, which was good news. That meant someone was still up there. I prayed it was my mother and called through the door to her as I pounded away. Behind the door, I heard the steel bars being lifted, and I stopped knocking, my heart racing. The door opened and my cousin Sala stood behind it, tears running down her face. "No," I said, "no." My knees went weak, and I closed my eyes against the truth that was coming. "Yannick," Sala said. "Yannick, thank God you're all right." "Where are they?" I demanded, even though I already knew. "Sala, where are my parents?" "I'm so sorry, Yannick." The Nazis grabbed them as they were coming back from buying bread. I saw them taken, right there in the street in front of the building. I staggered through the door and into the pigeon coop that had been our home, our sanctuary, for more than a year. It was totally empty. I fell to my knees and sobbed. Sala put her hand on my shoulder, but I could barely feel it. Mama, Papa, they were gone. My family was gone. I felt like my heart was being wrenched out of my chest. The emptiness of the pigeon coop weighed heavy on me. I was the only one left. How would I survive? Why should I survive? Maybe I should just go and give myself to the Nazis, I thought with bitterness, with defeat. No, I thought. I wiped the tears from my eyes with the back of my sleeve. My parents would not want that for me. In the place of my pain, I felt the stirring of determination. I would not give up. I would not turn myself in. No matter what the Nazis did to me, no matter what they took from me, I would survive. I was 13 years old and my parents were gone. I was all alone in the world, but I would survive on my own.